So you're welcome to use the chat function if you want to introduce yourselves and share your interest in today's topic of discussion. And there will be time for questions at the end. So feel free to pop those in the chat as well. And we'll get to as many as we can once we're finished up. So with all of that said, I'll now be passing over to Amanda to introduce our speakers and to get our panel underway. Amanda.
Great, thanks very much, Marie. And I'd just like to especially thank Marie's very hard work in organising this webinar and the Engagement Committee as a whole for their very enthusiastic work over the last few months to try and get both this webinar series underway and also getting Broadsheet back up and running, because we did have a bit of a gap in getting all of these things done. So thanks very much to Fiona and Jenna and Marie and Susan for their hard work on the Engagement Committee. So I'm thrilled that we finally managed to get this webinar series up and running. And we're starting today with a discussion among some of the members of the executive, but really all the people who are the panel members today have all prestigious positions in libraries here in Australia and in New Zealand, and have great insights, I think, to offer as to where the profession is, the kinds of issues that are affecting humanities institutions generally, I think, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity. I'm going to sneak in a question around artificial intelligence, AI, as well, since it's such a hot topic. So we'll get started. Just to give you a little bit more information about the panelists. Simon is our Vice President, BSANZ is Vice President, and also the Fryer Librarian at the University of Queensland. Anthony is the Secretary of BSANZ and Curator of Rare Books and Fine Printing at the Alexander Turnbull Library, National Library of New Zealand. And Susan Millard is the Web Master, for want of a better word, of BSANZ, and also Curator of Rare Books at the Baillieu Library at the University of Melbourne. So let's kick off the discussion with the question. I wonder if each of the panelists might tell us something a little bit about a little bit more about their career path, what led to their current role, and what their current job involves. So we might kick that off with whoever wants to go first. Susan, what about you?
Okay. So I'm coming to you from Naarm and would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to elders past and present. So I guess just my sort of background is I did a Bachelor of Arts followed by a graduate diploma in Information Services at RMIT, which I'm sure a lot of people have done who are in Melbourne. I worked in public libraries for quite a while. But I think it's a really good training ground, public libraries, because it sort of really, as a librarian anyway, makes you understand, you know, the community aspect in particular of librarianship. But then I became very interested in antiquarian matters and thought, wow, you know, I mean, you could be a librarian and work with rare books. That's an amazing thing. How do I do that? So I got very interested in, I did a lot of reading. And I volunteered at Melbourne Museum for a while, which I think is a really important thing to volunteer in a cultural institution if you're trying to get into the field. And also attended other, you know, sort of things held at like the conservation department at State Library Victoria and things like that. So it was all very exciting. So a job came up at SLV. I worked in the Australian manuscripts collection there for quite a while and then did some technology projects as well, which was really interesting. I think for me, that was a bit of, there was a moment where I could have gone technology. I could have gone down that road. But in the end, I feel that the books were calling me, and that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to work with the physical objects. So I did work in rare books at State Library Victoria as well. And then I got my job at the University of Melbourne. And I've been here for 14 years. That's a bit scary. But I think the job the job started as I was a curator of special collections, which is then it's, you know, everybody's been through a restructure. We've been through many, but so now I'm the curator of just the rare books collection, and we have other special collections as part of that, which is East Asian prints, maps, and music, and which is part of archives and special collections. We've got a huge archive as well, but I think the things that we actually do, what I do in my job, I think object-based learning, otherwise known as OBL, is a really important part of the job and an amazing thing, because we get to do classes with the books with students and work with closely with academics. And, you know, sometimes we do history of the book, so, you know, you'll get out of Gutenberg and you know, those sort of things. But also we have other classes from, so I have a sculpture class, a dance class where they look at anatomy books. We have one on microscopes. There's a religious texts class. So we have all sorts of different classes and a Shakespeare, of course. And, you know, so I think what's really great about that is that you get to see the students engage with the material, and you see them have that little frisson with the material where they get to get up close with it and touch it even, you know, and often they're very tentative about that. And it's a really great part of the job, I think, to really share our collections with students. I mean, other things we do, acquisitions. So that's, you know, buying objects, bringing in donations, cultural gifts. What did I do? I brought in a small collection of Samuel Beckett material. Some of it's signed by him, which is fantastic this year. And I actually bought an artist book, which is a Samuel Beckett and Jasper Johns, called Fizzles, which is it's an amazing item. So that's a really nice part of the job as well, getting to build the collection, you know, because obviously having worked there for so long, you know a lot about what's in the collection, and you get to then build on those things. The other big thing we do is promotion, and that is quite a big part of our remit now, I think. So exhibitions, I think in 2018 I did one called Art on the Page, which was about artist books, so the European artist books and that tradition, and how that influenced Australian artists, and particularly around migration stories, and, you know, a lot of them came out of that European tradition. So that was fantastic. That was a physical exhibition. And then during COVID, I got to do a digital exhibition, which was on Meanjin, the literary magazine. And that was a really enjoyable thing to do. It's quite different, you know, doing a digital exhibition to a physical one, but both fantastic things to do. I might just give a little plug for our virtual tours as well. We've just put up some virtual tours in my background. You can see our rare book room, and we've got a little virtual tour of that on our website now too. Other things are just, I suppose, collection management and care of the collection, and reference queries are really the other things that we do day to day.
Wonderful, thanks, Susan. And I think that whole question of the kind of physical object versus the virtual is one that's become such an important one in everything that we're discussing, and will also come up in our conference, I imagine. Anthony?
Thanks, Amanda. Thank you, Susan. That was great. Congratulations on the Beckett acquisitions. And I've taken the virtual tour. I recommend everyone get along. So as Amanda mentioned, my name is Anthony Tedeschi. I'm the curator of rare books and fine printing at the Alexander Turnbull Library, based in the National Library of New Zealand in Wellington. And my career path, I think like most of us, probably began or built upon a lifelong love of reading and the book as an object. This became a professional venture. We found out this could be a thing you could do. So officially began during my graduate school days. I enrolled at Indiana University, excuse me, which offers a specialization in rare books and manuscripts librarianship as part of their library science program. And so I enrolled in that, and that was coursework on history of the book, descriptive bibliography, reference sources for rare books curatorship, etc. And while I was still a student, I wound up landing a job at Indiana's Rare Books Library, which is the Lilly Library, which I think some of you probably know already in advance. And there I was in charge of the digitization program for the materials and assisting with reference inquiries and such. So that was 3 years and a great place to cut my teeth, cut my rare books teeth, I guess, as it were. And then from there, I saw a job opening in New Zealand. This would be 2006, 2007. And I thought, well, why not? I'll throw my hat in the ring and see what happens. And that was with Dunedin Public Library and its heritage collections. And so I got the job, made the move to the other side of the world. I didn't know anything about New Zealand beforehand, really. It was all just, a deep dive. And I mean, about 15 years later, here I am. So it's obviously a success. So I was with them for 6.5 years, did a master's in English Lit while I was there on the library Samuel Johnson collection. And then about a year after that, made the move to Melbourne, where I worked with Susan for 2 years at the university before returning to New Zealand when the current job became available. So I'd long wanted to work with the Turnbull collection. And so my opportunity couldn't be passed as much as I miss Melbourne. And so here I've been now for 8 years. In terms of what I do, I mean, Susan covered the bases really. Acquisition work, answering reference inquiries, collection management, some exhibition work, but too much. And I am one curator amongst many. Each format area in the Turnbull has its own curator. Researching and writing about the collection, that is sort of a big drive the next 1.5 years for us as our acquisition sort of development paths change. So we look at mainly what are termed as proactive priority areas. So for me, for rare books, I'm looking to expand the library's holdings of non-Western books. And its collection's weaker in certain areas, looking to fill gaps that may not have been addressed previously. And again, other tasks, really. I mean, Susan, like, you're going to cover all the bases. It's going to make my job really easy. It's talk about what I do all day. That's pretty much the gist of it.
Great, thanks, Anthony. Simon?
Thanks, Anthony and Susan. So I'd like to also acknowledge the owners of the land where I'm speaking from, which is the Turrbal and the Yagara people here in Brisbane, and pay my respects to their ancestors and elders. In terms of my journey, I grew up in central Queensland and in a regional area of Queensland, and just at some point in my life, I guess I fell in with people who were into books, and it sort of inspired me to become very bookish myself and start to collect books. And by the time I was finishing school, the only thing I wanted to do was come to the University of Queensland and study literature, which is what I did. And it was so enjoyable that I never wanted to leave the university. I stayed here for 7 years, doing a gentleman's degree, as they call it. And I did just about every subject I could, which was everything from old Icelandic literature to Australian literature to Victorian literature. It was just a wonderful, wonderful education that I got here. I finished in 95 and then I went overseas. I went to live in Japan for a few years and did some traveling. And then I thought I'll have to do something else to make my literary studies pay off. So I did some diplomas at the QUT, Queensland University of Technology. And that was in the area of journalism and then library studies, so two postgraduate diplomas. And the journalism diploma was very good for me because I've gone on to edit our journal for our folios. And I suppose the thing, if I essentially put it down to what is it that I love, it is, as Anthony and Susan have said, it's about love of books and reading. I really love material print culture and the stories that objects tell. And so if there's one thing I love to do is tell the stories of collections. And I do that a lot. I do speak at different places. I spoke just before Anzac Day at a place called the Moreton Club here in Brisbane about a World War I collection that's in the State Library. So I do a lot of talks and things, and I absolutely love it. I've just finished editing our journal Friar Folios, which I bring out as often as I can. And one of the obituaries there is for a wonderful man named Spencer Routh, who was the first reference librarian at UQ. And he was interviewed by the State Library, and he said, if I was a rich man, I would have paid to do the things that I've done in libraries. And I feel the same way, that I'm really labouring in my vocation, and I'm very fortunate to have this opportunity. I spent, so after I did those postgraduate diplomas, I did a placement at the State Library of Queensland, and then I worked there for 11 years. And it was wonderful. Again, this is the State Library's heritage collections in the John Oxley Library. And I did a lot of things like giving talks to school groups, community groups. And I was curator of military collections there for a long time. And that came to fruition during the centenary of World War I period. So amazing stories of the experiences of Queenslanders in the First World War. And out of my literary studies background, which still it's my grand passion, I did come to see, working with historical collections, that the stories, the real life stories of people, are absolutely incredible. So I worked at the State Library for 11 years, and I've been here at the Friar Library since 2014. Again, I'd spent my studies here at the campus, so it's like a second home to me. And the Friar Library is a beautiful collection, like the State Library's Oxley collection. It has rare books, manuscripts, mainly literary papers, so papers of people like David Malouf, Peter Carey, Oodgeroo Noonuccal, Thea Astley. It's a wonderful collection in literary, in terms of literature, also architecture, and we have rare books and different things like that. So I'm looking at Susan and the room you're in there, Susan, and that to me is paradise. as Borges once said, the great Argentinian writer, that paradise for him was like a library. And so I guess in my own little way, I try to hold on to the beauty of these collections, to tell their stories. And as Susan mentioned, object-based learning is very important. In the broadsheet before the last beautiful broadsheet, which was from a while ago, there was a little interview with me about the new teaching space that we had opened, and that's been wonderful. We've got a group of Charles Sturt University students coming in this afternoon. We do lots of groups, and it's a pleasure to highlight the collections. Yeah, so that's a bit about me. And yeah, I love the society. It's a wonderful group of people to interact with.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. That was really great. I guess this leads us into thinking a little bit about how, well, to hear some of your reflections about how your role might have changed in recent times, and perhaps thinking and looking ahead to the future in a world where we are increasingly not dealing with real people or real books, but dealing with the virtual, and increasingly also talking about artificial intelligence. ChatGPT just being one of those artificial intelligence tools that are out there. So I was wondering, and I'll open this up to anybody in the panel who might want to comment on it or might have a thought to get us going on this discussion. But I was wondering if you had any thoughts about how you see your role has changed in recent times and might be changing into the near future. And in particular, I think we might be quite interested to hear whether you have any reflections on this whole question of artificial intelligence and whether it has a role to play in the kind of work that you do.
Okay, I'll jump in, I guess. I mean, thinking about the question, I guess I'm thinking of sort of 4 points, I guess. I mean, I've been doing this this is my 20th anniversary of working in rare books. So over that time, digitization in terms of our technological advances certainly have changed quite a bit since those days. The abilities or the improvements of being able to zoom in really close on a detail of a book, for example. The ability to use different photographic techniques to peer into the binding of a book to see if there are fragments that have been used to line the spine, say, or other part of the boards without damaging the actual object. That's certainly a big one. I mean, tying on to that and looking to the future, I mean, I'd be quite interested to see what happens in terms of nanotechnology, say in conservation or preservation. I have no ideas about that, but I mean, it's just something I was wondering about when I was mulling over this question. Two, I think environmental considerations will probably weigh in more than they have in the past, and that does tie into digitization. I mean, there was a time where people wanted to get everything as much as possible online, which digitize everything. And then you come to a point where you understand that the machines that run digitized material or maintain it uses up energy, and there are server farms to maintain, and this is all quite impactful on the environment. So I know this was a discussion point, I think 2 years ago at the IFLA World Conference, and there are some institutions that are pulling back their digitization programs and being much more selective in what they digitize because of the potential environmental concerns around running these servers. Diversifying the collection is a point, we kind of touched on that. Or surfacing aspects of the collection that haven't been given a voice, say previously. And the last point I'm kind of mulling over, I guess ethics. I mean, ethical questions around acquisitions and questions of provenance and matters of thefts or writing past wrongs, shall we say, are all points to look at. And I think all these tie into what may happen in the future as well, and just built upon these four. But I'll be interested to hear, Simon and Susan's comments on that. And AI we can get back to.
Yeah, that's a huge one. Yeah, I mean, all those things are really important. I think the other things too that have changed since, because I've been in rare books for about 20 years too, and it's the internet obviously changed everything and made everything global, which then had effects on things like, the speed of transactions, like for acquisitions and things like that. I mean, you just have to be onto it immediately, or someone else out there is going to be buying something. So that's really changed. And probably more private money in the marketplace as well. Like items are far more expensive now than they were. And I think also, I think there is probably a greater focus on the uniqueness of individual copies, like the whole thing about bibliography is, and the book as a physical object and the materiality of that, because that has become a really strong focus, which maybe it always has been there, but I think it really is coming to its own now. So I think it's great. What's great for us, for our society, because it's like that is a really important thing. And, I suppose for the future, does that mean our collections become like a museum of the book? Do our objects, if everything is digitized, or maybe not, if, as Anthony was saying, maybe they're not digitized, but if things are, and then that plays into AI as well, because, I mean, AI can only harvest things that are actually online. So all of the material that's not digitized and not online and OCR'd, it doesn't know about. So, but if that got to that point, then where everything was digitized, then do our collections just become physical objects? As in, that's the only reason they still exist, basically, because the information's already out there in another way. So it's just an interesting thing. I mean, that idea of our collections becoming more like museums is this has been out there for a while, but I can see, particularly with things like AI, it could move that way. Yeah, and just what Anthony was saying about focusing on other things like women, and non-Western cultures, and trying to address some of those gaps in our collections, because there's definitely a lot of gaps there. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I'd just add to what Anthony and Susan have said. This is my 20th year working with special collections. Obviously, I mean, the internet's totally changed the way libraries operate more broadly. So at the 11 years at the State Library, I kind of saw this big building full of books on every level become, and the Oxley, just this little part that was about Queensland history, through policy changes with national and state libraries of Australasia, to really become the state reference collections contracted to really electronic resources mainly, and it became spaces for people to sit more than place books to be. And the emphasis became on the local state history collection. So it was interesting to see that over time. Because, and in the academic context here, I have very fond memories of the 1990s when the the libraries here were full of books. So we went into the Central Library. I still remember I could weave my way into the section where I knew all the Vladimir Nabokov books were, and I knew they'd all be there, and years I could come back to the same spot. And then fast forward 20 years and they're not there anymore. They're mainly student spaces to sit and study, a very contracted physical collection. But the Fryer Library's collection, conversely, we need more storage space. We need to house these physical things. So broadly, the changes have been dramatic. In the special collections area, which I've worked in all through, it has been fairly similar in that, we're making the most of physical things, telling their stories, housing them somehow, preserving them. But the dramatic thing has been the use of the digital technologies. And I remember one of the BSANZ conferences, we had the Rare Book Librarians Day. We were talking about how once upon a time you do the physical exhibition, and then you might do a little online version of it. And it seems to me now it's more about doing a digital exhibition and as an offshoot having a little physical display. So it's kind of interesting to see those things and the way they've played out over time. Certainly also I'd just say that the importance of making sure that our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander collections are properly described, that our libraries are safe spaces for people to access that material. That's been a huge thing. And it's certainly been underway in all the 20 years I've been in the libraries. But right now at the moment, we have a Path to Treaty process going on in Queensland. And we're very fortunate to have a team of colleagues who are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues who are very intensely working with the Fryer collections with us to audit them, look through them, make sure there's nothing that shouldn't be just open access. That's been a very large part of it. And I think it's been very rewarding because it just helps me to step outside of myself. Where am I coming from when I look at a book? I think about what are the different perspectives on history and the books and collections that we have. Not only if you're an Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander person, but what if you're a Jewish person? What if you're, so I found that a very interesting process. But I just wonder, I think that in a way, the way special collections at the university, there's a lot of the advancement part of the universities, the people who are philanthropists and fundraisers, they want to tap into this special quality of what we have, because we've got these amazing stories. That's another aspect I've found this special collections in the university context. Students love these object-based learning classes, but they are also, when we receive philanthropic gifts, we often use that money to purchase a rare book or what have you, or digitize things. So that's another dimension that's become a focus, I would say.
Yeah, fantastic.
I was just going to say, sorry, I was also thinking, we all talked about outreach as being part of our roles and often giving talks and that sort of thing. And I was thinking mainly of virtual outreach. I know there's been virtual reading rooms have been set up in numerous libraries in Australasia and elsewhere around the world that allow people who can't make it into the physical collection to access material. And that sort of opens up a broader perspective in terms of access or broadening access. You don't have to come to Wellington or Melbourne, for example. You can access a book from England virtually by way of a virtual reading room. And I think that technology will only sort of increase and get better with augmented reality or virtual reality.
Yeah, terrific. I think those are all really fascinating comments and raised so many interesting thoughts, I think, around both the potential that's come out of digitization, but then also that ability to sort of reach out to a much more diverse audience, a much more international audience potentially as well for the kinds of things that you do, while at the same time kind of raising these other issues. And I didn't know that was an issue around the environmental impact of digitization, but now that you say it, it makes sense. But it's you know, clearly a you know, big issue that we'll be facing into the future. So yeah, it was really interesting to hear about that. Well, I think we have enough time for the little extra question that I was going to pop in here before we discussed the joys of being a member of BSANZ. And that was, what do you have a favorite item in your collection, or one that you would really like to highlight? We've already heard about some of the great items in Susan's collections.
Well, it's a classic question of, you know, which child do you like better between your children, you know, which it's like, you know, I don't have a favorite. I don't want to say they're all my favorites, but, you know, it's hard to pick out one. But if I had to highlight an object, I will highlight one that's not in the rare books collection, but in our manuscripts collection. And I've posted recently on my LinkedIn account about this little object. And it's a little Japanese songbook made up of compressed cigarette packets, I believe. This is from a Japanese POW who was killed here in New Zealand. He was a prisoner of war during the Second World War. And there was a protest by the prisoners. The guards opened fire, and I can't remember the exact number of prisoners, I think maybe, who were killed in the exchange, but he was one of them. And on his body was this little collection of songs that he had memorized and wrote on the back of these packets. They got cigarettes as part of their rationing, and he had taken the backs off and compressed them and wrote these songs in the back of them. And the person who found it eventually donated it to the Alexander Turnbull Library for posterity. It's a really moving little object. So I really can't think of anything better than that one in this talk of humanity, not only his humanity in recording these, but the humanity of the person who found it and wanted to keep it for in a collection like ours.
Wonderful.
I've got one. One of the areas of interest for me for a while there was books published after James Cook's Endeavour voyage, and I did one presentation at Waikato University for a BSANZ conference about Queensland holdings of these books. And we have sets of Hawkesworth's official account of the Endeavour voyage, published in 1773 in 3 volumes, 3 quarto volumes. And it turned out that one of the sets that we have that was gifted to us in 1920 was a set that had belonged to the ship's surgeon on John Byron, Commodore John Byron's circumnavigation, and his story, his account of the circumnavigation is in volume 1 about the preceding voyages before the Endeavour. And the ship's surgeon who was on John Byron's circumnavigation has inscribed in the pages of the text little facts about what was transcribed by Hawkesworth in the account. So he had access to all the original journals of Cook and Banks and Byron and Carteret and Wallace. And when I discovered that, it's that thing where you have an object that's linked. So that voyage was in the 1760s. The book came out in 1773. It was gifted to the university in 1920, and here I am holding it in my hands in 2023. There's something about that link, the object linking you through time, and the actual handwriting on the page, this marginalia. You see the poster for our conference that we had here in Brisbane in 2018 on marginalia, and this story I told at that conference. That to me is one of our objects that I just think is incredible, and very interesting examples of marginalia that give you a behind the scenes look at the print on the page. And my favorite personal item is a book that David Malouf's An Imaginary Life, a little paperback copy I have that David signed for me when he was in the reading room one day. It was my battered old copy from when I was a student, and that's my little personal favorite.
Thanks, Simon. Susan, did you have any other items that you'd like to highlight? I'm sure there are many.
It is, as Anthony said, it's an impossible question, really. But I often go back to something called Hortus Sanitatis, which is what's known, it's an incunable. So it's pre-1500. It's 1491, published in Mainz, Germany. So it means garden of health. It's basically a herbal and a bestiary. And it talks about the plant, animal, and mineral kingdoms and their medical applications of those products. And it's just an extraordinary item. It's incomplete. It's missing about 68 pages, but it doesn't matter because the woodcuts are just fantastic. I don't think this is going to work. I'll try and hold up just a little. No, it's not going to work. No, not going to work. And it's just woodcuts that are, and it's got things like, basilisks and unicorns and phoenixes and mandrake and all sorts of things in it. And it's really amazing because it shows you what they were thinking at the time, what they understood about the world at the time. So this is, such an early time. And I just think it's like, and it's a beautiful thing. It's just, and it also has lots of marginalia in two hands. In fact, there's different people have sort of, one in English in particular, where the English words for everything are next to the items. And I don't know, it's just, I always love getting it out and talking about it. It's just one of my favorite things.
Wonderful. Thanks, Susan. Great. It was so interesting to hear about all of those items and very diverse items that you discussed. Well, we've got a few minutes until I open it up for general questions. If people want to start thinking about their questions and putting them into the chat, we just thought we'd sort of wind up this more formal part of the conversation by just briefly sort of talking a little bit about BSANZ and what benefits you found out of being a member of the society. I hope everyone who is listening is already a member of BSANZ. If you aren't, please do consider joining us. There are many benefits to being a member. So if anyone wants to jump in with what they've enjoyed about being a member of BSANZ.
So Susan, go ahead.
Go, Anthony.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, before I moved to New Zealand, I was a member and still a member of the American and the British Bibliographical Societies. So joining the Australian New Zealand Society was just a given for me in terms of supporting the research that members do and being able to, I guess, network and keep on top of who is working on what and what research areas are being done in the history of the book and bibliography throughout Australasia. And what I've gotten out of it is certainly that sense of community or collegiality or work with colleagues and the people you meet and the connections you make either through the annual conference coming up end of November. Keep your eyes peeled for more on that. I hope to see you all there. Yeah, I think I just ended it on that.
Yes, absolutely. Ditto, Anthony. It's just, I think it's the networking part of it's fantastic. But for me as well, personally, I feel like it's I really want to give back to the profession as well. And that's why I've joined the committee, the engagement committee this year. So I feel it's been a really nice experience to sort of be part of that and to, give back, I guess.
I absolutely love the society. When I was at the State Library, I was supervising my colleague Helen Cole, who's very big in the artist book world and was the main librarian at the State Library who was looking after our special rare books and so on collections. And she would go to these conferences and different things, and I never did. But then when I came to the Fryer Library, I thought, well, I might start going to these conferences because they sound really interesting. So I went to the first one in Melbourne, and actually, Susan, you spoke to us at the Value Library, and that actually inspired me to think about object-based learning, and it led to us creating our own object-based learning space. So not only are the conferences wonderful, it's wonderful to meet venerable scholars, people whose articles I'd read, say with the Cook-related research. Brian McMullen had written a very interesting paper in the 1980s about those Hawkesworth editions, Bordeaux editions. So it was wonderful to meet him at one of the conferences, Wallace Kershaw, people like that. And so I think it's a wonderful way to join with the other people who are interested in rare books, physical print culture, and meet them face to face or online to talk about these things, share our stories. But it's also really for a librarian, such as myself, it's a wonderful society in which you can connect. I can talk to Maggie Patton in Sydney at the Mitchell Library, Susan at the Value Library, Anthony over in New Zealand. So I've got this group of people to talk to share what's happening, to talk about the issues and the challenges, but to share the wonderful stories. So the conference to me every year is a wonderful opportunity just to soak in these incredible stories about the topic we're looking at in any given year. This year it's about transformation, and the image we used from that beautiful rare book, got the card right here actually, of the transformation of butterflies, a beautiful edition that we have, which is inscribed by the author. Just thinking of transformation, how has the digital transformed, how transformations occurred through literary fields and so on. Fascinating topics. I love it. It's the one society that I will always be a part of. I mean, we're all time poor, but this is the society I think is vital for people working in this field to be able to share and just glory in this beautiful thing that we do.
Great, thank you so much, Simon, and the other panelists as well. Okay, so I'm just keeping an eye on the chat. So there's a few questions that have gone in there. So I'm not sure whether I'm just going to be reading out these questions or if people would prefer to ask them in person. It might be a bit more fun if people ask them in person. So Karen Attar, I think, got the first question in there around historical bibliography. Did you want to ask that question, Karen, to the panel?
Yes, okay, thank you, I will. It's basically on the basis of the fact that I was imported for a couple of years, specifically to train people at the State Library of New South Wales in historical bibliography and rare book librarianship. And then I took that training to the University of Sydney and wondered whether there's more interest in Australia more widely. Listening to everything, I've felt extremely humbled by the paths people have taken, when for us it's so easy. You just do your degree and then you do your library course, and if you do it at University College London, there is always an option on rare books and always an option on medieval manuscripts. And the other rare book schools, some of them do it. There are additional possibilities in other ways, and it's so much harder here. I really admire everyone. But anyway, yes, so question is there more desire for it here?
I think you've hit on it, Karen. There's a desire, but the opportunities are limited. You know, you have the rare book summer school is probably the main one, but it doesn't mean that those of us who are trained in, say, descriptive bibliography or historical bibliography can't offer small sessions to local groups or university settings. But you're right. You and I are fortunate in that way to have studied where we did in the States or in the UK, where there's more formal training opportunities in library school for this, unlike here in New Zealand or Australia. But yeah, admirable for those who want to pick it up and do it. The same for rare book cataloging as well.
Thanks. Thank you.
I think there's certainly a thirst for it. We hosted a bookbinders conference here, an international bookbinders conference a couple of months ago, and it was beautiful to see all these binders come from all around the world, from England, and sharing stories. And more recently, Nina Whittaker from the State Library of Victoria visited us, and we were sharing, and she's got some expertise there in the cataloguing of books. And obviously, Karen, you know, I saw you last year at the conference and you were speaking. It was very interesting. So I think there's the thirst. the society helps us to share what we have, and so to learn from others. And I think it's up to us. I mean, resources at the University of Queensland, you know, no one's going to give me $1 million to just turn everything into rare book cataloguing, but I will advocate for the importance of it and do what I can to make sure that our beautiful rare books that we have, because we do have some, like the picture you can see above is called a book from the 1500s called The Dialogues of Preachers Moralized, that featured in our conference. And it, somebody from Mags Brothers in London said our copy of that book is the most interesting in the world. It had belonged to Gabriel Harvey, the friend of Edmund Spencer's. And so we have some things that are truly rare. Obviously, in Great Britain, you're just awash with wonderful things as well. I think there, just to answer your question, there is a thirst, and it's about how do we make the case to make sure we can employ someone to learn these skills, but also to bring somebody from one of our sister brother institutions, whether it's State Library Victoria and having Nina join us, or yourself, Karen. I definitely do think there is a thirst.
Right. Thanks.
I'll just jump in there too. Interestingly, a lot of our people are sort of coming through, or who are interested in rare books are coming through the Master of Art Curatorship courses now, rather than, because there is no book, you know, there's no book course. A lot of them are, at the university anyway, are coming through that sort of angle rather than librarianship, which is really interesting. It's a bit of a change.
Great. Nicholas Sparks, did you want to ask your question?
Nick's in an open plan office. If he could read it out, he'd be appreciative. They just put a note in the chat.
Well, I'll just read it out from the chat. What do the presenters see in our professional futures about the convergence of skills, collections, and personnel across the GLAM sector? Is specialisation of subjects, formats, or collection areas a luxury the sector can no longer afford?
It's a good one. Oh, thanks, Nick. I like to think about that a little more, but I mean, my initial thoughts would be it might be that specialization is not necessarily going the way of the dodo, but needing to be spread a bit more around formats. Maybe it's a matter of, rather than my just being rare books in terms of printed books, shall we say manuscripts or broader field prints, for example, early printmaking, maybe. So you have a broader format. There does seem to be a move towards that, a bit more generalization, I think, in different institutions where someone gets experience working in a variety of formats, and that could stand someone in very good stead, I would think, to go on to be manager of a collection that is diverse in format areas. I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know. What do you think, Simon, Susan?
I think that it's important that there's specialization to the level of special collections, so that people who are working with manuscripts, rare books, realia, objects, and those heritage collections, so they have a value, they're object-based values and so on. If there's another opportunity and people have developed knowledge of, say, rare book cataloging and rare books in particular, that's great as well. Resourcing is always an issue, so I think it's important. I do think it's very important that we are able to specialize at the level of special collections, because they are quite different to the other parts of institutions. What links the galleries, museums, and the special collections in libraries is that we have valuable collections. We want to tell those stories and show these collections and use them for teaching as well. So I would say maybe it's a luxury, but to go down right deep into one aspect of that, maybe, but I still think it's wonderful where you have somebody like Karen who's just got this incredible knowledge of that thing, that's a rare book cataloging, and can share that with others. But I think it's a luxury we need to argue for and advocate for.
Yeah, definitely. That advocacy is really important. I mean, we've still got each curator, we've got a curator for each collection, which is good, but I know that management would probably like to broaden out a bit. But yeah, I think we just keep fighting the good fight to maintain specialisation, at least in the special collections, so people have at least experience in that area.
What I find too is that it takes time to develop knowledge of what you have, and so where you've got layers upon layers of knowledge, people, whether it's in a state library context or academic library, if so they've got important dignitaries coming and things like that, and they want to showcase some collections, you can't actually do that unless you have people who know what they're talking about. So in that case, if you're going to say, well, special collections are important for philanthropy, or they're important for teaching, well, you need to have people who know what they're talking about. So you need to have people who've specialised. And for me, over 20 years, I now know all the different connections between things. And is that a luxury? Well, maybe, but if you don't have people like that, you don't have a lot of cultural capital, as far as I can see.
Okay, well, one last question from Jack Kelly. Did you want to read your question out, Jack, or would you prefer I did? Okay, well, I might just read it out. What advice do you have for a recent graduate in the librarianship recent graduate in librarianship to get into the rare book world?
Well, I suppose it comes back to what I said before. It's like, volunteer somewhere, get some experience. It is difficult. Just become very knowledgeable as you can about the area on your own time, I guess, really. Because you can't do a course, like Karen was saying, it's like, oh, you can go and do a rare book course. You can't do that here. So it is difficult. But just getting that experience, and we have, like a volunteer program within the university. It's great. So those students they come to us and they get some experience, which then they can put on their CV, and that's a great way to sort of show interest and show that you're interested, and also gain knowledge.
I think the field work is a really important opportunity. If you're doing field work somewhere, last year we had a fieldwork student, and I just saw with her the real desire to be an archivist, to work, and so now she's got a job in our UQ archives. You have to be somebody who stands out for me. Like I really saw just in everything that person did, in the way they were dedicated to what they're doing. So make the most of that opportunity, but otherwise be very tenacious to keep in touch with the rare book librarians that if there are events coming up, to come to those things, to be in conversation with others, look for every opportunity and be very tenacious. If you want to make it happen, you can make it happen. And that's the way I have been, because there have been many times when I could have not stood up to something, to do something, but you just need to say, well, I'm going to do that. And there's not 1,000 jobs out there, but if you really want to make something happen, you can, I think. And I do think there's a future for rare book librarianship and for special collections, because it's like, experience the real thing is the way I think of it, and there are beautiful stories attached.
Yeah, again, nothing new to add other than to encourage you to keep going with it, Jack. Just, as Simon and Susan both said, look for opportunities to get your foot in the door if you can. Make those connections with us and BSANZ and other rare book institutions, and just see what's possible. Yeah, because as Simon said, there is definitely a future in this field, and we need younger generations to come after us. We noticed it's our 20th anniversary for all three of us. So, that says it all.
Great, thanks everyone. Well, I think we're almost out of time. I think I'll just hand it back to Marie, who has a few final housekeeping type announcements to make. Thanks, Marie.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you to all of our speakers today. That was absolutely wonderful to hear your backgrounds and your sort of thoughts on where the industry is going sort of in this day and age with all the new developments. So when you guys finish up today, you'll get a survey that'll pop up in your browser if you're interested in filling that in to give us a bit of feedback about today's session. That would be fabulous. Thank you. As mentioned at the start, if you'd like to contribute any ideas for future webinars, or if you have anything that you would like to write or read about in our broadsheet, do please email us at our email address, which was in the chat earlier, but it's bsanzengagement@gmail.com. You can also find contact details on our website, which you can just Google, or it's a nice easy one, bsanz.org. So if you're not a member of the Society, please consider joining us. All three of our speakers gave an excellent plug for what they feel the benefits are from being a member. So that would be wonderful if you're not already one. And as mentioned, we have a conference coming up shortly. I'm sure much faster than anyone really is ready for. But that'll be from the 27th to the 28th of November, and we'll be online only this year. So do keep an eye out on the website and social media for more information about signing up for that. So thank you all for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed it, and do let us know if you'd like to see any more, and what sort of things you'd like to hear us discuss. So thank you.